While one would think similarity may encourage understanding and camaraderie, in the 41st millennium it seems to often end up rather negatively. This is exemplified in particular by the relationship between Dorn and his erstwhile brother, Perturabo, the Primarch of the Iron Warriors. Though they shared a myriad of striking parallels, both were often seen as reserved to the point of being almost statue-like, and being rather unyielding and unbreakable in their convictions, all the while being some of the greatest artisans of war in all of creation. And while at first glance, many would believe that their shared mutual traits would breed some amount of kinship, it seems quite the opposite would happen, as records show that even from their first meeting, there seemed to be a great amount of animosity between the two. However, the precise origins of said animosity is unknown to anybody but the two. A closer examination would reveal a rather troubling pattern of behavior, which indicates that rather than fostering understanding and a good-natured competitive spirit, their shared traits often served to make their differences more glaring, driving a wedge deeper into a rather fragile relationship. And it was these differences which further drove their conflicts, as while both Dorn and Perturabo favored siege warfare, their methodologies could not be more different. Perturabo's approach was marked by brutal directness while employing overwhelming merciless force and being willing to sustain horrific, nigh unacceptable casualties in order to achieve victory at a greater pace. In contrast, Dorn, while willing to pay a significantly higher price for triumph than some other Primarchs, sought to minimize unnecessary losses of life, only accepting casualties when casualties were part of the only acceptable outcome, viewing them as a last resort rather than a strategy. Dorn's idealism stood in stark contrast to Perturabo's rather pragmatic and mechanical view of things, furthering the rift between the two, which would deepen throughout the entirety of the Great Crusade. And it would become worse as time went on, and Perturabo would be pushed to more and more dangerous fronts, in large part due to his own successes, allowing him to see a contrast in how he and Dorn would be treated. Amongst the many battles that the nascent Imperium fought during the Great Crusade, few stand out as prominently as the monumental triumph achieved against the single largest Orc empire ever encountered. This pivotal conflict, known as the Ulnar Crusade during M30, represented a formidable imperial offensive against Orc warlord Uruk and his interstellar Orc Empire. The final assault would occur on the capital world of this Orc stellar empire, situated within the central Ulnar system of the galaxy's Ulnar sector. The scale of the crusade is one which could only be referred to as staggering, as it involved the deployment of well over 100,000 Space Marines, supplemented by a mind-boggling 8 million Imperial troops, along with thousands of Armada Imperialis starships, along with their accompanying support personnel. This extensive mobilization showed how important it was to defeat the Orcs at Ulnar, and how mighty of a triumph it was. The Orcs of Ulnar represented the single largest concentration of greenskins ever vanquished by the raw military might of the Imperium of Man prior to the outbreak of the Third War for Armageddon in the 41st millennium. The successful defeat of the Ulnar Orcs not only showcased the tactical prowess of the Imperial forces, but would also mark a solidification of the Emperor's status as a unifier of humanity, as following this decisive victory, the Emperor would return to Terra, where he would embark on the monumental task of operating and opening his own version of the Eldari webway for humanity's utilization. In the Emperor's absence, the command of the vast forces of the Great Crusade would fall onto Horus, as the Ulnar Crusade would mark a significant turning point in Horus's career and the history of the galaxy, as he would be granted the newly established title of War Master, marking him as a supreme commander of all imperial armies who were not directly under the control of the Emperor. This new role bestowed upon Horus granted him extensive authority over his fellow Primarchs, along with each and every expeditionary fleet in the ongoing campaigns across the galaxy. In the wake of this promotion, Horus Lupercal sought counsel and insight from his fellow Primarch brothers regarding the monumentous change. This elevation not only set him apart and made him first amongst equals, but it also raised him above all his brothers, stirring a rather complex mix of emotions. Some had muted objections, along with thinly veiled discontent, especially amongst those who felt the title rightfully belonged to them. Despite their status as paragons of war, the Primarchs would be shown to not be immune to the oh-so-human flaw of a sibling rivalry along with petty competition, exhibiting some of their most human-like traits in their interactions after this event. This would lead to Horus acting with the assistance of his eliquary, Molgust. Horus would work diligently in order to court the favor of his brothers, as he aimed to quell any fears or doubts along with reaffirming allegiances and generally securing their cooperation, as at this moment he viewed it as essential that none of the brothers felt openly slighted or overlooked, and he hoped that each Primarch would recognize their importance within the grand scheme of the Imperium. While some like Sanguinius, Lorgar, and Fulgrim had already openly acclaimed Horus's elevation, others were more reluctant and showed vehement hostility. These were Angron and Perturabo, who largely expressed their fury in the new shape of the hierarchy. This would prompt Horus to act, primarily focusing on the diplomatic avenues to mitigate resentment and jealousy. In contrast, figures such as Lehman Russ and Lionel Johnson would remain cynical yet not openly hostile towards Horus's new position, displaying little surprise in the Emperor's decision, but each believing that their own elevation to said role would have been better, at least in their view. In contrast, others like Rabut Guilliman, Jagatai Khan, and Rogel Dorn accepted this new order with grace, recognizing the Emperor's choice as both just and inevitable. They understood that Horus had always been the brightest amongst them, the first to shine in the Emperor's eyes, and their confidence in his suitability for the role stemmed from an awareness that none of the other Primarchs had ever matched his remarkable achievements or his profound bond with the Emperor. In this volatile environment, the seeds of rivalry had been sown, but it seems Rogel Dorn had held his head high and maintained an even keel amongst his brothers. And in part it was due to this that in his quest for guidance, following his elevation to War Master, Horus Lupercal would seek counsel from his two most steadfast brothers, Rogel Dorn and Rabut Guilliman, both embodying the pinnacles of imperial ideals, as they led their respective legions with unmatched dedication and military acumen, which could potentially put even Horus's to shame. To Horus, their approval was akin to a younger sibling seeking the endorsement of his more accomplished brothers. Following his promotion, Dorn would arrive at the 63rd Expeditionary Fleet at Horus's invitation, facilitating a critical dialogue regarding the new responsibilities and the scope of the powers that the War Master would now hold. Being seen as the finest of military intellects amongst the Primarchs, Dorn's strategic mind was more linear and, in a way, just as disciplined as Guilliman's. Moreover, Dorn's mind retained the flexibility necessary for inspired decision-making, which greatly aided Horus's reordering of the Primarchs and how the campaigns would move on with his new position, as Dorn's record during the Great Crusade was realistically second only to Horus and potentially the Lion. Yet where Horus was flamboyant and charismatic, Dorn remained resolute and reserved. This distinction underscored the rationale why Horus chose to seek counsel from his brother. This goes so far as Horus once remarking that if I were to besiege a fortress held by you, the conflict would last an eternity, with the best offensive met by the best defensive. This exchange showed how highly Horus held Dorn's strategic intellect, as at this moment these titans of war would shape the ongoing path of the Great Crusade, each playing a pivotal role in not only crafting, but implementing the Imperium's new offensive as it spread relentlessly throughout the stars. As the Great Crusade would commence once again, Rogel Dorn and the Imperial Fists, paragons of loyalty and martial prowess, would earn the esteemed favor of the Emperor, as their unwavering reliability made them invaluable, often summoned to reinforce faltering campaigns and to secure crumbling fronts, along with to shatter stagnant stalemates and drawn-out sieges, as the Emperor would frequently call upon Dorn and his sons to stand by his side in battle, which would be an honor that statistically was bestowed upon the Imperial Fists far more than any other legion. A striking illustration of this would occur on the assault on Ophelia 8, where the Emperor led a formidable cadre of 100 custodies and 100,000 Imperial Fists into the fray. In another crucial campaign, the Emperor summoned not only Horus and the Luna Wolves, but also Dorn of the Imperial Fists to form a vanguard against the shrouded dynasties, once again showing the great favor that the Imperial Fists and their Primarch had earned. Time and time again, the Imperial Fists would respond to the Emperor's summons, executing his will with unwavering dedication, while other Primarchs and their legions may have carried out more illustrious campaigns and expanded the Imperial truth across countless worlds. The Imperial Fists stood as the foundation rock upon which the Imperium of Man was built. Despite their esteemed status and accolades, reverence did not seem to sit well with all of the brother legions. It was well documented that there was no end of animosity between the Imperial Fists and the Iron Warriors, and while Perturabo's disdain reached its zenith, it seemed other Primarchs also harbored discontent with the trust placed upon Dorn and his sons. Dorn's forthright nature often seemed to exacerbate tensions between, as his panache for unvarnished truths and his uncompromising ideals, though admirable, frequently led to much unnecessary friction between his peers. It was this very trait that likely influenced the Emperor's decision to overlook Dorn as War Master upon withdrawing from the Great Crusade. In contrast to Dorn's straightforwardness, Horus seemed to excel in diplomacy, being rather adept in forging alliances and maintaining harmony amongst the fractious forces of the Primarchs. Where Dorn risked division, Horus fostered unity. Where Dorn rejected compromise, Horus sought to accommodate all. Yet even as Horus assumed control of the Great Crusade, Dorn would be given a grandiose appointment. He would be made the Praetorian of Terra and designated the Defender of the Throne World. In this pivotal role, the Imperial Fists would serve as the garrison force, protecting Terra while Horus advanced the Imperium's ambitious campaigns. With this decision, it seemed the trajectory of the Emperor and his sons would be irrevocably altered, setting the stage for one of the greatest conflicts, which was led by a large amount of enmity spawning from this decision. Before the Imperial Fists could reach Terra in full strength, they would be in large part ensnared in the catastrophic opening shots of the Horus Heresy, as they would be stranded in large part in the void for an extended period of time due to the violent warp storms that heralded Horus's rebellion. The Imperial Fists fleet would ultimately encounter the severely damaged loyalists of the Death Guard frigate known as the Eisenstein. This vessel had narrowly escaped the infamous Isstvan III atrocity, bringing grave news of Horus's betrayal. Initially, Dorn met these claims by Nathaniel Garro with great skepticism, nearly resorting to violence when Garro revealed that his brother Primarch, Horus, had turned traitor against the Imperium and the Emperor. However, as more survivors from the Eisenstein, which included Captain Garro, Lacton Quds of the Luna Wolves, and the Remembrancer, Euphrates Keeler, who would later become an Imperial Saint, urged him to accept the shocking revelation, as Dorn's disbelief would now wane. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Dorn would swiftly mobilize the large majority of his legion, directing them towards the Isstvan system on a war footing, as he made the decision to take what was left and return to Terra, in particular with his veteran Space Marine company, determined to personally deliver the harrowing news of Horus's betrayal directly to his father, as the fate of the Imperium now hung in the balance and the Imperial Fists seemed poised to play one of the more pivotal roles in the unfolding tragedy. In the wake of the schism of Mars during the Horus Heresy, loyalists on the Red Planet found their salvation in the formidable Imperial Expeditionary Fleet, as Malcador the Sigillite, the regent of Terra, had entrusted Dorn with a mission of paramount significance to secure the forges of Mars for the Imperial war effort post-haste. In response, Dorn announced his intention to deploy a force led by Legion Champion and First Captain, the legendary Sigismund, accompanied by 4 companies of Imperial Fists and a substantial contingent of Imperial Auxilia. The target of this operation was an arc of loyalist-controlled territory in Mars, in particular within the Northern Hemisphere, specifically the critical munitions manufactura of Mundus Gamma and Mundus Oculum. These vast industrial complexes were essential to the Mechanicum's production of weaponry and power armor for the legions of Astartes, and Dorn planned for his forces to strike swiftly and harshly, capturing these vital forges and then expanding their control outwards, all the while securing additional facilities with minimal damage to the facilities themselves. Sigismund's companies made their landing to Mundus Oculum as the broader Imperial expeditionary forces engaged in fierce battles across Mars's rugged terrain. Amidst the chaos, 13 companies of the Imperial Army's Saturnine hoplites advanced under heavy fire towards the traitor lines encircling the Forge Expixven Maximo. As the stakes were high and the outcome of this mission would significantly impact the Imperial war effort in the ongoing struggle of the Horus Heresy and against Horus and the traitors. There would be no compromise. They had to win, regardless of the costs. Further south on the Red Planet, 2 companies of Imperial Fists, alongside 4 regiments of Jovian Genodries, totaling nearly 15,000 Imperial Army soldiers, descended upon the Mundus Gamma Forge complex, under the command of Captain Cambia Diaz. However, the mission's outcome would veer drastically from expectations. As soon as they landed, Camban Diaz and Jovan's regiments found themselves ensnared in a desperate battle for survival. The Saturnine hoplites, tasked with breaking the siege at Eopsian Maximo's forge, faced relentless resistance from the grotesquely transformed weapon creatures of the Dark Mechanicum. The horrors of this conflict would push both forces to their limits, as ancient weapons would become demon engines, and god machines would be corrupted with the all-encompassing power derived from the warp, and technology previously deemed heretical would be used openly in battlefields once again. However, despite the odds being stacked against him, with his company outnumbered a staggering 100 to 1, Cambian Diaz managed to secure the armor forges and the ammunition silos on Mundus Gamma. Yet, as the traitor forces pressed their advantage, Camba Diaz's troops were forced back towards the landing fields, suffering grievous losses in the process. Meanwhile, Sigismund, aware of the dire situation, understood that the Imperial expeditionary forces could not hold the forge for long. Nonetheless, they had successfully secured a substantial cache of essential supplies for transit to Terra. When Sigismund's companies arrived in Mundus Oculum, they were uncertain about the challenges that lay ahead. But to their relief, they discovered that fabricator Locum Zacharias Kane had remained loyal to the Imperium, facilitating their efforts greatly. Sigismund's forces would acquire vast quantities of munitions for transport, and a rather impressive stockpile of Astartes weaponry. However, time was not on their side, and despite the dedicated efforts of Kane's servitors working tirelessly, they could not complete the preparations quick enough. Sigismund's shipmates alerted him to the looming threat on the periphery of their warfront. A formidable enemy force was rapidly closing in, comprising of infantry, armored vehicles, Skitari, and at least 2 traitor Titan legions, totaling a nigh unimaginable 60 war engines. The clock for Sigismund and his forces was now ticking. Caught in the tumultuous struggle between his thirst for vengeance against the traitors and his mission bestowed upon him by his Primarch, Sigismund would now face a daunting reality. The rebellious forces which were arrayed against him were rather formidable, and while his desire for retribution burned fiercely, the imperative was to secure the vital armor and weaponry from Kane's forge post-haste. These supplies would be essential for the future defense of the Imperial Palace. Despite the fury coursing through him, the first captain understood the gravity of his situation, and his orders would be clear. Pursuing reckless acts of defiance would not serve the Imperium's interests. As he weighed his options, Locum Kane impressed upon Sigismund the critical stakes that were involved. Should both Mundus Oculum and Mundus Gamma forges succumb to the traitors, the Imperium would find itself unable to effectively replenish their combat losses, which would be sustained in the inevitable conflicts to come. Thus, with the weight of heavy responsibility upon his shoulders, Sigismund steeled himself to remain focused on the mission, recognizing that true loyalty to the Emperor would require both discipline and strategic foresight. In a mere span of a few solar hours, the forges of Mundus Oculum and Mundus Gamma would be engulfed in flames, their vast industrial machinery and manufacturing capabilities forcefully reduced to smoldering ruins. The implications of such devastating losses of not just technology but knowledge would resonate throughout the Imperium for millennia to come, as knowledge, technology, expertly trained personnel, and the sheer fabrication capabilities of these facilities would in essence never be replaced or replicated. As the chaos of war unfolded, Imperial starships would launch from the surface of Mars like comets, striking out into the void. Astartes, along with Imperial army vessels, would even collide in a desperate scramble to escape the Red Planet's now war-torn grasp. Ultimately, fewer than 1,000 loyalist warriors would manage to break free before the Manufactorum succumbed to traitor control. Despite the dire circumstances, the vigilant rearguard of Astartes and other loyalist forces would not have their efforts be in vain. Their sacrifice, numbering in the thousands, secured tens of thousands of newly fabricated Mark IV armor, along with multiple pallets of Mark V, along with other crucial materials. These supplies would ultimately prove pivotal in the Imperium struggle against the treacherous legions led by Horus Lupercal, making it a bittersweet victory for the Imperial Fists amidst overwhelming losses. As the Horus Heresy raged on throughout the galaxy, Dorn and his Imperial Fists would undertake the monumental task of reinforcing the Imperium's defenses of Terra and the Sol system as a whole in anticipation for the War Master's relentless onslaught, with the traitor legions at the War Master's side, now outnumbering the remaining loyalists. It would be through Dorn and his son's efforts that Terra would be transformed into an unparalleled bastion of martial might. Yet the main fortress would be distinguished by two walls: the walls within and the walls without. The walls within represented the gateway from the Imperial dungeon to the Emperor's cryptic Great Project. Here, the Master of Mankind would stand resolutely at the forefront, flanked by his esteemed custodians and the rather mysterious Sisters of Silence, guardians of the Emperor's great secrets. Conversely, the walls without would be encompassed by the extensive defense spheres radiating from the Imperial Palace outwards, extending into the void just beyond the Sol system. At this outer perimeter stood Dorn, the Praetorian of Terra, commanding his stalwart Imperial Fists, as the integrity of both walls was paramount in their planning. Should either falter, the very foundation of the Imperium would crumble, along with humanity's hopes for liberation from the forces which were now set to claim their souls. And this defense of the Sol system, in particular the strategic spheres that Dorn created, would be maintained as echoes throughout history due to how functionally incredible they were, in vastly decreasing the advantages held by the traitor legions. The Imperial Fists meticulously stratified the defenses into independently codependent spheres. The sphere's command would be entrusted to senior Imperial Fists who were elevated to the rank of Lord Castellan, each selected by Dorn himself. This structure not only exemplified Dorn's strategic acumen, but also embodied the relentless resolve the Imperial Fists held to protect humanity's last stronghold against the ever-encroaching tides of treachery. Though the Imperial Fists' multi-layered defense would protect many human strongholds throughout the Sol system, it was particularly designed in a multi-layered system in order to hold off the traitor legions from reaching Terra. The first sphere, which was the outermost layer of this formidable structure, was commanded by the ever-indomitable hero known as Sigismund. Following him would be the legendary Helprecht, in control of the second sphere, not to be confused with Helprecht of the Black Templars. And the third sphere would be under the command of Ifrid, who would effectively encircle the Martian battlesphere, successfully containing the treacherous Jark Mechanicum tech priests. At the heart of this defense stood Dorn himself, overseeing the direct protection of Terra. The Imperial Fists would be meticulously distributed amongst these spheres and supplemented by thousands of warships, along with void defenses and millions of mortal soldiers. However, the vast distances between each sphere posed a significant challenge. Signals dispatched from one command to another would take solar hours to traverse the millions of kilometers separating them, since Vox communications could now be intercepted by the traitors, necessitating more rustic forms of communication. When the anticipated traitor invasion finally erupted, the communications would occur via signals derived from Morse code using astropathic flares, rather than a traditional astropathic choir. This was due to the instantaneous nature of how swiftly these messages would be transmitted, though the complexity of said messages was markedly limited by comparison. And eventually, the urgent signal would convey the chilling news that the traitors had breached the defenses of Sol on the Fire Mountains, which, to all who understood it, knew that humanity now faced extinction as it stood on a knife's edge between oblivion and hell itself. And the Imperial Fists knew they would have to move to defend their last bastion against the forces of betrayal. As the Imperium as a whole descended into civil war, the Alpha Legion would demonstrate a remarkable maneuverability through this unrelenting chaos. Utilizing vast networks of operatives and agents, they adeptly transferred war material and personnel across sectors, largely unnoticed, including into the strategically critical Segmentum Solar, in particular, right into the heart of the Sol system. Through their relentless efforts, the Imperial Fists had transformed the Sol system into a nigh impregnable fortress, meticulously organizing each layer into a formidable defense designed to thwart the impending assault by the War Master Horus. However, it seems that Dorn did not take into account the Alpha Legion, who in part had been driven by their insatiable need to prove the superiority of their own tactics, sought not only to brazenly breach Terra's outer defenses, but to execute a stunning humiliation of the Imperial Fists. Their audacious goal was to infiltrate the most secure location within the galaxy, the Imperial Palace itself. This would occur by activating dormant assets hidden within Terra for decades, as the Alpha Legion would achieve what no other faction had managed before, to successfully deploy several agents within the Imperial Palace, particularly within the Investory. This was a hallowed space which was adorned with towering statues commemorating the Primarchs of the 20 Space Marine Legions. I mean, there's only ever been 18 legions, so these statues were to commemorate the 18 Primarchs, along with the Space Marine Legions and other heroes of the Great Crusade. In this critical juncture of the Solar War, the very foundation of the Imperium's strength seemed to be threatened from within rather than without. For an extended period of time, 2 planets within the Investory remained devoid of their original statues, monuments to the lost Primarchs, whose legacy, there were no lost Primarchs, whose legacies were definitely not obliterated. Their histories not erased from the records of the Imperium. In stark contrast, the statues of the 9 Primarchs, who would eventually betray the Emperor, were simply shrouded, as their identities would remain concealed, yet present. In a bold operation, they had infiltrated and breached the sanctuary, dismantling the statues of all but 2 Primarchs, Alpharius, the Master of Deception, and Dorn, the Steadfast Protector and Praetorian of Terra, before leaving. This act was not merely one of destruction, but also one that would send a calculating message to Dorn as a challenge to the Imperial Fists and an assertion of the Alpha Legion's dominance in warfare. The audacity of this operation would be compounded by the fact that it was executed in secrecy and hidden from the various adepti within the Imperial Palace. Even Malcador the Sigillite, the Regent of Terra, and the Emperor's elite bodyguard, the Legio Custodes, were prohibited from entering the Investory, thereby remaining unaware of the humiliation that had been done to them and what had befallen the many statues of the Imperium's greatest warriors. However, eventually Malcador would become aware of the Alpha Legion's infiltration, yet how he became aware of it exactly remains an unsolved mystery. Yet Dorn was resolute in his determination to confront the treacherous 20th Legion in due course. In the aftermath of this act of sabotage, an Alpha Legion fleet commanded by Haro Master Clycinelus launched an assault of the outermost defenses of the Sol system. This fleet succeeded in capturing several of the moons of Pluto, which were strategically significant within the defense perimeter. The exact event and steps which were followed during this assault remained a closely guarded secret, known only to Rogel Dorn and his Huskarl bodyguard. This secret seemed to loom largely over the Praetorian, in particular due to the repercussions that it may have in the unfolding Solar War, as it seems a harbinger of further treachery was brewing even within Dorn's own well-defended Imperial domain. In a calculated bid to distract the beleaguered Imperial defenders from their true objective, Pluto, which was a crucial linchpin in the Loyalists' surveillance network within the Sol system, the Alpha Legion executed a series of brutal acts of murder sabotage upon multiple planets almost simultaneously, as Rogel Dorn would now have to grapple with these diversionary attacks led by Alpharius, which consisted of over 200 vessels advancing towards Pluto and its moons, Charon, Kerberos, Nyx, Styx, and ultimately Hydra. Upon their arrival, the Alpha Legion ignited further uprisings orchestrated by infiltrator teams embedded throughout the Sol system. Their primary target was, ironically enough, Hydra, a fortified moon which housed a critical astropathic monitoring station. Alpharius himself spearheaded this assault. In contrast, the Loyalist defenders would be under the command of First Captain Sigismund, who mustered a mere paltry 30 void ships to counter the overwhelming assault of the Alpha Legion's fleet. The ensuing battle would be catastrophic for the Imperial Fists, who were caught off guard by the relentless barrage. The now outnumbered legionaries suffered devastating losses, which were exacerbated by fire ships concealed within the Alpha Legion's ranks, who would be unleashed to wreak havoc upon the defenders. As Kerberos fell to the enemy's control, it unleashed a destructive rain upon Charon, Nyx, and Styx, employing heavy weaponry to decimate the already strained Loyalist positions. Despite these overwhelming odds, the Imperial Fists, embodying the tenets of loyalty and valor along with their steadfast nature, would hold their ground against all odds, as this overwhelming onslaught would not cause them to break. Their steadfastness amidst this chaos would soon be tested further, for the outcome of the Battle of Pluto would hold significant ramifications for the fate of the Sol system and the Imperium itself. As the battle raged on, Archimedes, master of the Huskars under Rogel Dorn, discerned the Alpha Legion's true objective: to dismantle the Imperial astropathic monitoring network centered on Hydra. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Archimus rallied a contingent of Huskarls for a bold assault against the Alpha Legion, confronting the forces led by the Primarch Alpharius. In the midst of this fierce engagement, the Huskarls fought valiantly, yet suffered grievous losses. Archimus would be mortally wounded. As hopes waned, the traitor forces appeared to gain the upper hand. Yet it seemed the tide of battle would shift unexpectedly, as from the depths of space the Imperial Fists' mobile star fortress, the Phalanx, would make its dramatic entry, commanded by none other than Rogel Dorn, accompanied by a formidable fleet of Imperial Fists, which was bolstered by the reinforcements of the Armada Imperialis. The arrival of Dorn's forces ignited a new fervor in the Loyalist ranks, and with the employment of the unique gravitational forces within this sector of the Imperium, the Imperial Fists would execute a rather unconventional rapid approach, utilizing gravitational slingshots to traverse vast distances to Pluto, ironically in a way that largely resembles some methods of Tau travel. With renewed resolve, Dorn led his Huskarls in a direct assault of the astropathic chamber within Hydra. The tide of battle had turned, but the outcome would hang perilously in a battle between two Primarchs, as the fate of the Sol system was now hanging on a knife's edge. In a decisive moment of battle, Rogel Dorn and his remaining Huskarls would teleport directly into the fortified chamber of his brother, Alpharius, confronting him and his entire cadre of Laranon Terminators directly. As the two Primarchs clashed, the air crackled with tension, and the dying Archimus watched in desperation, powerless to intervene as this life and death duel between demigods unfolded before him. Just as Alpharius prepared to deliver the final thrust with his pale spear, Archimus, though gravely wounded, summoned the last vestiges of his superhuman strength in an attempt to thwart the impending tragedy. However, his sax harmlessly rebounded off the haft of the spear, leaving him vulnerable. Unbeknownst to Archimus, Dorn had anticipated the strike and in a split-second decision stepped in to absorb the blow, using his shoulder to pin Alpharius in place. Seizing this opportunity, Dorn grasped the spear with one hand and unleashed his deadly legendary chainsword, known as Storm's Teeth, slicing cleanly, or as much as a chainsword can, through Alpharius' wrists, severing his hands without hesitation. Dorn followed through with a brutal strike across his brother's chest, impaling him with his own legendary weapon. In a final devastating act of resolve and vengeance, Dorn delivered a decisive chop of his chainsword to the top of Alpharius' skull, sealing the fate of the traitor's Primarch. With the death of their leader, the Alpha Legion's fleet would quickly fall into disarray until Alpharius could be found again. At that moment, Omegon, the twin brother of Alpharius, felt a chilling loss within his very soul, as his sibling was now gone and he would withdraw into himself, distant and contemplative. Soon after, he received word from the War Master that he demanded to speak with Alpharius regarding the status of the Alpha Legion's incursion into the Sol system. As he had done countless times before, Omegon took on his brother's name and assumed the mantle of sole Primarch of the 20th Legion, forever altering the course of the war, as his decisions would drastically contrast with those of his twin brother.